When Haason Reddick joined the Eagles in 2022, he described himself as a weapon, able to use his blend of size and athleticism to fill multiple different roles for a defense. Reddick's versatility gives a defensive coordinator a heck of a chess piece, allowing the defense to disguise what they are doing. There are a handful of these type of athletes playing this weapon position at an elite level in the NFL. The next person expected to join this fraternity is Nolan Smith, and he may very well be the freakiest athlete of the group. He was the heaviest player in NFL Combine history to record a sub 4.4 40 and jump over 40 inches in the vertical. He pairs that athleticism with excellent mobility, effort, and toughness to be a force when he's on the field. Today is going to be a study on these versatile weapons to see how they can excel and what Nolan Smith needs to do to become the next great weapon in the NFL. When looking at pass rushers, one of the most important traits is how quickly they can get off the ball, especially if you're a speed rusher like Nolan Smith. The faster a player can get off the ball, the faster that they can get to their spot before the offensive lineman can. It's no surprise with Nolan's testing numbers that he has elite burst off the line. His 40 time and 10-yard split were both in the 99th percentile of all defensive ends ever tested. The crazy thing with Nolan is, I think he can get even faster off the line. Let's look at this rep. There is a lot of wasted movement here. He sinks his hips and takes a false step backwards with his trail foot. By the time he gets out of his stance, the tackle has already taken 2 kick slides and can meet Nolan at the spot. Now you may notice that he also takes a false step with his front foot, though I disagree with this being a false step. I'm about to go on a tangent about false steps and acceleration, so bear with me for a minute. But it's important to discuss because the stance and get off sets up everything else in the rush. Let's take a moment and look at sprinters. When lined up in the starting blocks, notice the angle of their shins and the location of their feet. The proper shin angle allows the runner to explode out of their stance in a horizontal and vertical direction when they are applying force with their foot against the blocks. If their shin was perpendicular to the ground, the force they generate from pushing against the ground would send them in a vertical direction. Notice how the feet are behind the runner's center of mass. The feet must be behind the runner to generate acceleration forward when starting from a static position. When a defensive end is in a 2-point stance, it is impossible to get the shin angle and foot placement into the proper starting position to have an optimal get off. So one of 2 things must happen. 1, the player will either have to sink their hips while at the same time rolling their knee forward over their toe so that the shin is in a proper position, or they will have to false step. The false step puts the foot behind the player's center of gravity and positions the shin in an optimal angle to explode forward. If you've ever played sports, not just football, I'm sure you've heard coaches preach about not taking false steps. While there are a lot of heated debates about false stepping, there are several studies showing that taking a false step is likely the best movement pattern to take when trying to accelerate from a stand-up position. For one, it's just human nature. There was a study published in the Journal of Biomechanics that showed 95% of athletes will false step when told to accelerate from a standing position. False stepping also allows an athlete to cover ground faster. Another study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research showed that false stepping was faster than forward stepping when testing participants' ability to accelerate 2.5 and 5 meters. And finally, there are several other studies showing that false stepping also generates more power. When looking at notable pass rushers, the vast majority of them are false stepping. They are false stepping over and over and over again. Now looking back at this rep from Nolan, we certainly want to see him eliminate the sink in his hips combined with the false step of the back foot. The get off is important because rushing the passer is all about beating the offensive lineman to certain spots on the field. Nolan certainly has the raw athleticism to beat tackles to the edge, but you'd expect to see it happen more based on his traits. You see flashes on tape of what he can become, but the truth is, Nolan needs some refinement in his pass rush techniques and game plans. He often relies on a long arm, which can have mixed results. The long arm move is a great way to keep blockers off a pass rusher's pads due to the fact that one arm is longer than 2, provided the proper technique is used. Let's take a cue from boxers to see this. The staple punch in boxing is the jab. It is a great move to throw to deliver a quick blow while also keeping oneself at a distance from any counter strikes. Notice how each boxer extends one arm fully at the shoulder while also turning their torso and hips into the direction of the punch. This allows them to cover more distance than if they stood square to their target and punched with one hand straight forward. Khalil Mack has one of the best array of long arm moves in the game. and you can see him put these principles to work. Combined with good leverage, hand placement, hip extension, and leg drive, Mack is able to toss the tackle to the ground on the way to the sack. Nolan repeatedly reverts to his long arm, but he's not always committed to it. He will combine multiple different moves at once and not have his feet synced up with his hands. Let's look at this play against Alabama, as this is a perfect example. First, as he approaches the tackle, he sticks his left hand out like he's going to use a long arm move, but he doesn't drive his feet. Instead, he takes a Euro step back away from his long arm. With his right arm, he tries to chop the tackle's outside hand, a move more commonly used when executing a speed rush. He would have been better off using that left hand to be able to dip and rip through after chopping with his right hand. Here's an example from Josh Sweat showing how to utilize the Euro step, swiping the tackle's outside hand and finishing with a dip and rip. On this next play against Vanderbilt, he approaches with a stutter step, which is a good changeup and can help draw the offensive lineman's hands out. I'd rather see Nolan use a different move considering the offensive lineman had his hands extended, but he reverts back to his long arm. If he's going to use a long arm, then he needs to show a conviction when using it. He doesn't really commit. He has bad leverage, no body lean or hip rotation, and his arm is hardly extended. He does extend and lean late and ultimately gets separation, but by that point it's too late in the rush and the tackle counters by chopping Nolan's arm down. I've been harping on Nolan's long arm, but for good reason. It's a move he needs to be proficient in as a smaller player. He needs to find ways to utilize his leverage so he can keep longer players off of his pads. The long arm will also set up another move that Nolan should definitely add to his arsenal. That move is the ghost technique. The ghost technique is really a simple move, one where the rushing defender drops their inside shoulder below an offensive lineman's punch. This is a fantastic move to use as a smaller, flexible speed rusher, as many times the taller tackles struggle to bend and react to the move. Von Miller is the master of the ghost technique, using his speed to threaten the edge and his uncanny flexibility to bend under strikes from offensive linemen. While the ghost move can be used just by simply ducking under a strike, Von often uses a long arm to set it up. Flashing the long arm typically gets the tackles to show their hands, allowing Von to dip under their outstretched arms. It's important that the player is good with their long arm technique. If the tackle doesn't respect the pass rusher's ability to generate power with their long arm, then they will ignore the long arm and wait for the counter move to come. There are other ways to set up the ghost technique as well. Here's an example of Khalil Mack using a Euro step to set up the ghost technique. One last thing to touch on about Nolan's pass rush. He was often late with his hand usage. Many times blockers were able to get in his pads and stop his rush because he was fractions of a second too slow to knock their hands away. He will need to improve his hand usage at the next level. Now, what we just talked about were all examples of skills that can be coached or trained up. What is difficult, and most times impossible to attain for the majority of athletes, is Nolan's combination of mobility and acceleration. You can teach a player hand fighting techniques. You can teach a player how to set up their move to be able to counter later in the game. What you can't really teach is the mobility needed to bend the corner like the Von Millers and Nolan Smiths of the world. Nolan has an impressive ability to bend his body, flatten the corner, and accelerate to the quarterback. Stiff pass rushers struggle to turn the corner and often get washed out of the play because of their lack of mobility. Being able to bend and accelerate is one of those traits that is highly coveted among edge rushers, and Nolan has that. Like I said, teaching technique is one thing. Being able to quickly move your body through different planes of motion is another. Nolan's selection in the first round is a bet on his upside, believing that his elite traits will translate to production with proper coaching. Overall, Nolan's pass rush skills are still very raw, but to be fair, he didn't have a lot of true pass rush plays. Georgia ran a ton of stunts. I mean really, they ran a lot of stunts, which takes away reps of traditional pass rush plays. On top of that, Georgia was absolutely loaded with talent, which allowed them to have a deep rotation on their defensive line. And with the number of blowouts they had, Nolan didn't have to play until the fourth quarter a lot. Nolan Smith had significantly less snaps than all of the defensive ends taken in the first round of the 2023 draft, besides Lucas Van Ness, and that's only because Van Ness had 2 years of playing time. There's still a lot of room for growth with Nolan, and he will get better with more reps. Moving on to the run game, Nolan is surprisingly stout. I say surprisingly because he is one of the lightest edge players ever tested at the combine, so one would think that he is easily moved by bigger players. But Nolan is a dog in the run game. He plays with a fearless, possibly reckless courage. He is as tough as they come. He willingly throws his body into pulling linemen when that's required of him. He consistently plays with excellent leverage, understanding that he is not going to survive against guys weighing 60 to 90 pounds heavier than him with bad leverage. His mobility helps his ability to anchor down as well, since he is able to have the proper hip and knee bend required to drop his center of gravity. He shows the ability to play with good hand placement, and he consistently demonstrates the one arm is longer than two principle in the run game. Though undersized, he does well setting the edge. Nolan's lateral quickness allows him to be effective with line movements. Here against Oregon, he is able to quickly stunt into the B gap before the tackle can get a hand on him. Notice how much ground he is able to cover with his initial step. That is a remarkable leg drive from a defensive lineman. His flexibility is on display again as he dips under the punch. When runs go away from Nolan, he has more than enough speed to chase down players from the backside, and he is a bit of a neutralizer when it comes to the quarterback run game. On this play, South Carolina is running a read option, forcing Nolan to decide if he's going to collapse inside on the running back or stay put in case the quarterback pulls the ball to run. After seeing the tackle block down, Nolan uses a surf technique, keeping his hips and shoulders squared to the line of scrimmage and shuffling down the line to close the space between himself and the tackle. When the quarterback pulls the ball, Smith shows a quick twitch needed to redirect and chase. Athletic edge players like Nolan help to slow down the quarterback run game. Nolan will need to continue playing with excellent technique against the run, as he has less room for error than someone with a bigger frame. When linemen can get in his pads, they can get some serious movement on him. Overall, I would like to see him add a little more weight to his frame, as it will benefit him in the run and pass game. Nolan's smaller size does not fit with every team's needs or minimum requirements to play in their style of defense. But if a defense has a plan and knows how to use a hybrid player like Smith, it can create huge strategic advantages. Though I wouldn't base my game plan around it, Nolan has the athleticism required to drop into coverage, either patrolling an area of the field or matching up with running backs and tight ends. Dropping him into coverage in itself isn't the strategic advantage, as there are other players better in coverage on defense. The strategic advantage comes in the fact that it can confuse an offense, as they're never really sure who will be rushing the passer and who will be dropping into coverage. A defense can drop Nolan in coverage on one side of the field, while overloading the other with extra rushers, all without losing a man in coverage. Dropping defensive ends in coverage allows a team to mess with an offense's pass protection. This play against South Carolina demonstrates what I'm talking about. Dropping Nolan leaves the offense blocking two guys with three players, while a free rusher comes up the middle. This is something the Eagles are already familiar with, having Haason Reddick in the building. Here against the Giants in the divisional round, the offensive line is using a man protection scheme, which means that 5 offensive linemen are responsible for the 5 defensive linemen in front of them. When the ball is snapped, both defensive ends drop in coverage while the safety blitzes through the overloaded A-gap unaccounted for. Daniel Jones panics, thinking the Eagles sent a blitz even though only 4 players were rushing, leading to an interception. Weapons like Nolan Smith, Haason Reddick, and Micah Parsons give defensive coordinators the chance to be very creative in their game plans. Their ability to make plays in coverage helps open up opportunities for their teammates. I know a lot of Eagles fans did not like when Haason Reddick was in coverage instead of rushing the passer, and that shouldn't be the focus when building the game plan. Dropping these players in coverage should be a changeup, thrown just enough to keep the offense always second-guessing. What teams and fans will fall in love with is Nolan's attitude, leadership, and mindset. On the field, we've already seen this show up when he launches himself into blockers significantly bigger than him. He has an outstanding motor, relentless until the play is over. That is exemplified by this play against Oregon. He takes on 3 separate blockers, but at no point does he give up in his pursuit of the ball. I can't tell you how many players I've seen in this position take a breather for the next play. He will get sacks just based on pure effort and motor alone, something we saw several times in college. That kind of effort is infectious. When listening to his teammates, you can tell how much he was an influence in that Georgia locker room. He's a player that a lot of people looked up to. I think this was demonstrated when Nolan ran his 40 at the combine. Watch the excitement that his former teammates had when watching Nolan run his sub-4.4 40.
Come on, Bo! Come on! Let go, Bo! You straight? Come on, you're right, man. 4-3. Let go! Let's go! Let's go!
I've never seen that before. Though Nolan is raw and lacks the typical experience of a first-round selection, you can tell that he's a player that is going to put in the work to improve. His versatility is a creative defensive coordinator's dream, and his athletic traits are generational. The Eagles are betting on his upside, as he's not really ready to come in day one and be an every-down starter. But there are not many people walking the earth that can move the way he moves at his size. Put simply, Nolan Smith is a freak of nature. Don't be surprised when he becomes the next great weapon in the NFL.